Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for peace talks to resume over the war in Ukraine. It follows a meeting with France's Emmanuel Macron in Beijing. The French president said he was confident Xi could act as a mediator.
I know I can count on you to bring Russia to its senses and everyone to the negotiating table.
Joining us now is Andrew Small. He's Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund's Indo-Pacific Programme. Andrew, fantastic to have you on the show. Do you think Emmanuel Macron truly believes that Xi Jinping has any intention of helping bring about peace? And in a manner that's acceptable to the West, I suppose we should be clear. Xi Jinping's smiling face in Moscow 2 weeks ago perhaps suggests differently.
Yes, I think Macron personally seems to have a certain amount of confidence in his capacity to nudge Xi Jinping to occupy a more constructive role on this. I think generally in Europe there's a lot of skepticism about this, but we've seen Macron in the past, in the run-up to the war, in his efforts with Vladimir Putin, and even further back in his wooing efforts with President Trump in a very different context. He believes in his own kind of personal capacity to do these things, but I think there's also just an effort at the moment to show that all channels that can be exhausted are fully exhausted on this. And I think it reflects also a lot of concern about the deepening China-Russia relationship and a real sense on the European side that there needs to be an additional push with China at the moment to ensure particularly that ties between China and Russia don't deepen when it comes to areas such as lethal aid.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many points that we can pick up on in there. If it is about tough talk, why take the enormous business contingent? It was almost essential then to take Ursula von der Leyen as the EU representative just to ensure that this wasn't a meeting between Emmanuel Macron and Xi Jinping that is about France also leveraging the business opportunities here, because it kind of weakens the argument and the push towards efforts to promote peace in Ukraine when you're there for business purposes too.
It does, and I think even with the Commission President there, of course it muddied the message, because that's what China will see, that despite Xi Jinping's highly contentious trip to Moscow and reaffirmation of support to Putin in the middle of this war, that barely a couple of weeks afterwards, France arrives with a substantial business delegation and the long list of contracts that was just announced today as a result of this visit, which even the German Chancellor on his trip didn't announce. But nonetheless, I think it has at times been compared to a good cop, bad cop routine between the two of them on this trip. Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, gave a very forceful speech, probably the most forceful by any European leader on China that we've seen in recent years, talking about how China's becoming more assertive internationally, more repressive at home, and that it means a significant recasting of Europe's relationship with China and a de-risking, which she talked about today, a rebalancing of the economic relationship to reduce certain dependencies on China and reduce the risks of transfers of sensitive technologies. But that still leaves the door open for a very large commercial relationship between the two sides. But all of that, nonetheless, in terms of being able to send a singular message that says that China's relationship with Russia and the security risks to Europe from the war in Ukraine are of paramount importance, of course it still has the effect of undercutting that.
Yeah, I was about to say, for some of these nations, it's not de-risking at all. In fact, the reliance and the relationships going in the other direction. Do you think, as you point out, we have a whole list of contracts signed on this visit between France and China, that in some way it's prevented Europe expressing an appropriate level of concern over the provision of potential weaponry from China to Russia? I mean, what are Europe's red lines?
I think on that front, the messaging has been clearer. I think the harder thing has been to navigate what else is going on in the China-Russia relationship, because from Russia's perspective, a lot of what China is doing already, the economic backstop that it provides, the financial support, the dual-use transfers that have been taking place on such a large scale, the political support, the diplomatic support. In some ways, these are even more important than the question of whether China transfers artillery ammunition, important though I think that question is right now. But I think the one message that has been delivered consistently on the European side has been that lethal aid to Russia would cross a red line and that it would have detrimental impact across the entire Sino-European relationship. It would basically turn China into the enabler in a much more direct way of security threats to Europe. And this wouldn't just translate into sanctions on specific entities that were making these transfers. It would have implications across the entire economic relationship, because I think it's very different if you think about what de-risking would mean in the context of a tightening Sino-Russian military nexus versus the situation we have now. So I think those messages were delivered relatively clearly. I think the harder thing has been to calibrate how to handle China in a context in which, even if it doesn't deliver weapons to Russia over the coming months, this is a relationship that is growing closer, and China is continuing to act as an enabler for Russian capacities to continue to prosecute this war.
Let's move on and talk about another hot button issue, because I can't disagree with any of that. Taiwan and China's response to the recent meeting between the House Leader Kevin McCarthy and also a US contingent now in Taipei for business and political meetings as well. A far more muted response, at least for today, from China than we saw last August.
Yes, well, we're still waiting on this, because, of course, with the various guests in town at the moment, I think it would have been rather difficult to go ahead with the sort of performance that we saw around Speaker Pelosi's visit. There's actually a fair cluster of diplomatic engagements taking place in the coming stretch. I think we may even have Lula coming through town. We've got other Europeans coming through. So the timing of being able to respond, I think, has been made more complicated by the fact that Xi Jinping and the Chinese government generally have been going through this process of kind of diplomatic re-engagement with the world after zero COVID. But I think the concern on the Chinese side is still they want to be able to show some sort of forceful response. They've still made these kinds of threats about not standing idly by. I think they were waiting to watch the press conference and the meeting with Speaker McCarthy and Tsai Ing-wen to see whether there was any pretext that might be given that would give them the opportunity to, or justification for moving ahead with more than we've seen, which is just, there's live fire drills going on, there's some evidence of naval activity and things, but nothing comparable to what we saw before. But I don't think they've been given that excuse. So I think it's going to be harder for them in a period in which they are trying to go through this economic and diplomatic re-engagement effort right now to be able to replicate what they did, let alone do anything worse.
Yeah, the revolving door of diplomacy also includes members of the Middle East as well. I mean, one area where the West has not been successful was bringing the Saudis and the Iranians to the table for the first time in 7 years. And there's representatives from those nations in Beijing at this moment as well. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think it's been very helpful for China to be able to position itself as publicly as it's been able to on this Saudi-Iranian deal. I think in practice, they did help to close the agreement between the two sides. It's not that China didn't play a role on this, but a lot of the legwork had been done before the Chinese engaged with this. And I think a lot of the momentum in that instance had really come from the two parties themselves and some of the Iraqi mediation that had taken place in advance of the direct Chinese role. So it was a modest but consequential role that China played in closing this out. I think its wider significance in terms of China as a peace broker, or any hopes that this could translate into some of the other contexts that people have been talking about it, particularly when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, I think are rather overblown. But it does indicate a willingness to step up, particularly in the Middle East, but also to start to try and put some meat behind the global security initiative that is really turning into the new signature set of projects for Xi Jinping in the way that the Belt and Road Initiative was years before. And I think they've been able to use this Saudi-Iranian deal to really trumpet that and portray this as an alternative model to the Western hegemonic approach to these matters. And the Saudis and the Iranians have been happy to hand it to them.
Yeah, it certainly signifies warmer relations with these nations than perhaps the United States currently enjoys at this moment. Andrew, fantastic to get your insights. Thank you. Andrew Small, Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund there. We'll speak soon.